In 1999, I was on vacation at Vallecito Lake, Colorado, which is where I grew up, near Durango. And I was sitting in the living room with my dad. And we were watching TV or something. I can't remember what we were watching, not having really any conversation. And all of a sudden, he looked at me and he goes, "Son, what is this electronic mail I keep hearing about?" And I had to think for a minute. I was like, electronic mail? Oh, email. Okay, yeah, Dad, let me tell you. I said, you know, how you write a letter to me sometimes and you put an address on it and you send it to me and the post office hopefully gets it to me. And then I respond and write it back. I said, that now is all done electronically via the internet. And he goes, oh, you mean like the World Wide Web? And I go, yeah. And I was encouraged. I was like, my dad knows what the World Wide Web is. And then he goes, so is the World Wide Web, is that in D.C.? And I go, well, it is, but it's worldwide. So I said, it's all over the world. He goes, do you like Chicago? And I go, yes, Chicago is in the world. It's in Chicago. And I said, it's all over the world. And he goes, wow, that's really cool. And so for the next, no joke, 3 hours, I got a piece of paper, and actually several pieces of paper because I had to start over a lot, to describe to him what the World Wide Web was in really simple pictures and cool words and stuff so he could begin to understand it. And for some reason, after 3 hours, I said, Dad, do you want to have your own email address? And he was giddy. I mean, it was like Christmas for a 6-year-old. He's like, I can have one? And I was like, yeah, remember, this is 1999. So I said, sure. And so AOL, or I don't remember what it was, Yahoo or something back then. And so we set up an email address, and he was very concerned because he couldn't have David McGinnis because it was already taken. That really threw him for a loop. So David McGinnis 171 was just, it didn't calculate. But we got past that, and I opened up an email, and I said, see, you can create an email here and put in a subject line and type in my address and send it. And then this really confused him. I logged out of his account and went to my account and received the email on his computer. That totally blew him away. And I said, see, I got it. And I hit reply, and I replied to him, and for the next hour and a half, we had an email conversation sitting next to each other. And he was just amazed at how it worked. And so we left, and about 10 days later, we're sitting having dinner on a Wednesday night here in Arlington, when we lived in Arlington, and we get a knock on the door about 6 o'clock, and I'm like, this is kind of odd. Go to the door. It's the FedEx guy. And, you know, this is 99. We're not ordering a lot of stuff online or anything. We don't get FedEx packages. And so I get it, and I open it up, and there's this printout of an email. And it says in the upper right-hand corner, son, I got this joke via electronic mail. Thought I'd share. Love, Dad. So after the shock and laughter, I decided to call my dad and say, hey, Dad, thanks for the joke, but open up your laptop. And I said, I want to show you something. He opened it up, and I said, see, there's create an email and reply all. Well, look at the button right next to it. It's called forward. And I explained what forward was, and he said, I remember like it was yesterday, he goes, this is going to save me thousands of dollars. So I don't know how many jokes he FedExed to the world, but he must have done it a lot. And so I'm laughing, I hang up, I'm telling Marianne and Drew and Jenica, we're laughing about it, and then I was like, crud, I just taught my dad how to forward email. So for the next long period of time, I got multiple jokes forever, but at least it was free, and he didn't have to pay for FedEx charges. But what was so interesting in that whole dynamic is he had some misconceptions about electronic mail and technology and the internet. And he had bits of information from various places, but he hadn't got the clear, big picture of what this World Wide Web is all about. And I believe we have some misconceptions like that as well about certain topics. We have bits of information that we've picked up from people or conversations or the media or whatever, but we don't have the whole picture. And I think one of those things that we don't have the picture on, and we have a lot of misconceptions on, is generosity. At the University of Notre Dame, it's always encouraging, I think, and not shocking when biblical principles are empirically verified and proven by the academic arena. Isn't that interesting? And at the University of Notre Dame, they embarked on the Science of Generosity initiative. And so they wanted to begin researching generosity at all kinds of different angles. And one such study that they embarked upon was involving 2,000 people examining the relationship between generosity and your well-being. And after they did this study with 2,000 people, it took a couple years to do. This is what they found. The number one theme was that generosity is paradoxical. Now, I know most of you know what paradoxical is, but for the one that doesn't in this room, paradoxical is you come to two conclusions that don't seem to relate at all. You may come to a conclusion that looks senseless and logically unaccepted, and some examples of funny paradoxes are like, well, nobody goes to that restaurant because it's too crowded. You know? I mean, that's an example of a paradox. Or don't go near the water until you learn how to swim. Okay, so that's a paradox. So what they found is generosity is the same way. It's very paradoxical. And here's the findings. Number one, when you give, you receive back in return. Number two, in giving ourselves to others' well-being, we enhance our own well-being. In letting go of some of what we own, we increase our own security and sense of comfort. That's paradox. By giving away our own resources, we move ourselves towards flourishing. And the overall theme of this, I mean, as you read through those, as followers of Jesus, this doesn't surprise you, does it? I mean, Proverbs 11:24 says, "One gives freely, yet grows all the richer." Or in 2 Corinthians 9:6, which you've heard, "Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously." And 3 verses later in the Message paraphrase, it says, "This most generous God who gives seed to the farmer that becomes bread for your meals is more extravagant with you. He gives you something you can then give away, which grows into full-formed lives, robust in God, wealthy in every way, so that you can be generous in every way." So the Bible clearly demonstrates these truths that this study discovered in surveying thousands of people that even though they don't know it, maybe they're created in the image of God. And now listen to their summary statement of their whole study of 2,000 people. They boiled it down to this: if we fail to care for others, we do not properly take care of ourselves. God knows that caring and being generous to others is good for our souls. In his clever, creative, sovereign way, he has created this incredible paradox where we give of ourselves to others. When we give ourselves to others, we get back in return. But in fact, this case for others goes way beyond just helping our own personal well-being. In John 13:35, Jesus says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So by caring for and loving and being generous to others, number one, we care for ourselves. That's a pretty cool deal. And number two, we show the world who God is. That's impressive. I like that paradox. So the question is, why don't we care for and love others? We have research proving its incredible benefits, coupled with God's word, that explains the truth of it all, yet we still struggle being generous towards others. And I know, wait a minute, Paul, I am generous toward others. I love my spouse. I provide for her or him. I pause the TV when she wants to talk. I play with my kids when I get home, even though I'm tired. I provide for my family. And all I have to say to that is kudos. Great job. You should love your family. That is necessary and expected. But the definition of generous is showing readiness to give more of something than is necessary and expected. That's what generous is. In fact, listen to what Jesus says about a life of generosity. And I'm going to read this out of the Message. It's 10 verses, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to close your eyes. Okay? So if you have a Bible, I'm sure you probably don't have the Message sitting in front of you, so it won't matter anyways. But even if you look at the Bible on your phone, I'd like you to just not look at it, and just close your eyes. And I want you to picture, this is Jesus talking in Luke 6 about what a life of generosity looks like. And I want you, as I'm reading this, to imagine this in the realm of generosity. Okay? So close your eyes and listen to this. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. Here is a simple rule of thumb for your behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you. Then grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, do you expect a pat on the back? Run-of-the-mill sinners do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Garden variety sinners do that. If you only give for what you hope to get out of it, do you think that's charity? The stingiest of pawnbrokers does that. I tell you, love your enemies. Help and give without expecting a return. You'll never, I promise, regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way our Father lives towards us, generously and graciously, even when we're at our worst. Our Father is kind. You be kind. Give away your life. You'll never find life given. Give away your life. You'll find life given back, but not merely given back with bonus and blessing. Giving, not getting, is the way. Generosity begets generosity. He's not referring here to your wife or your husband or your kids. He's talking about your enemies. People who don't think like you, who don't look like you, who don't vote like you. Those that may be behind you or in front of you, those above you or beneath you. Those younger or older than you, those not in this community, those not in your family. Those with different views, different feelings, different lifestyles, different thoughts, different educational levels and social statuses. He's talking about radical generosity to others, outside of your obligatory circle of the necessary and expected, and into another circle of others. So again, why don't we care for and love others? Why doesn't our generosity extend beyond the necessary and expected? In 2014, in the Huffington Post, the author explored the answer to this question: why do we ignore other people's problems? This is what he said. He said, we are humans seeking companionship and interaction with others of our kind. At the deepest root of this idea is that if another of our kind, humans, is being hurt or killed or in need, we're going to naturally respond. We want to take care of our kind. However, he said that's not what's happening. In fact, he expounds on the point that many of us have this mentality that he calls, it sucks to be you. He asked, what kind of society do we have when we see fellow humans suffering and all we can come up with is, it sucks to be you? We see folks in need of money, or we see elderly folks slowly crossing a busy street, or we see someone with a flat tire, or we see women and men and children in need physically, spiritually, emotionally, and all we can do is move on and, it sucks to be you, right? We see bad stuff all around us, problems and issues and depravity involving people, humans, like us, but we do nothing. Now, maybe it's just because we don't know what to do, or we feel ill-equipped to respond, or we're just like, someone will step up to that and do that and fix that and respond to that. But I agree with where the author lands on this issue of indifference. This is what he says. We are too busy with our daily schedules, with our jobs, our smartphones and our apps, our kids and their stuff, all the noise around us, to even take a second to care about another human being's issues. Here is what I've personally discovered. Busyness destroys our joy. It derails our ability to hear from God, and it cripples our capacity to love and be generous to others. I'm going to say that again. Busyness destroys our joy. It derails our ability to hear from God, and it cripples our capacity to love and be generous to others. A seminary professor wanted to conduct an experiment on his campus. And so he got three different groups of students, and they were all given a different task. And so the first group, they got an envelope, and they opened it up, and it said, you need to get to Stewart Hall immediately across campus. You have 15 minutes to get there, and if you don't get there in time, it's going to affect your grade. The second group got an envelope a few minutes later, said the same thing. You got to get to Stewart Hall. You have 45 minutes to get there, and if not, it will affect your grade. And then the third group got an envelope a few minutes later and said you have 3 hours to get to Stewart Hall. What they didn't know is the professor worked with the drama department and hired 3 drama students that these groups would interact with and see on the way to Stewart Hall. And the first drama student, just a few, not far at all from the other side of campus where these students were starting, was on kind of sitting down on this by this tree, and he was holding his head, just crying out in great pain. Okay, and then about halfway through the walk, there was another student that was lying flat on his face as if unconscious. And then the third drama student was on the steps of Stewart Hall, the destination, Stewart Hall, lying there acting as if he was having a seizure. And the results were this. The first group, not one person stopped. The second group, just two students stopped. And then the third group, all students stopped, at least to help one person. And the professor had proved his point. Hurry hinders ministry. Let that sink in for a minute. Hurry hinders ministry. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm no stranger to hurry, and some of you in this crowd know me. Now, I don't call it hurry because I'm a marketing person, and, marketing, we don't lie. We reshape the facts into a greater truth. And so I don't want to call it hurry. I call it efficiency and maximum productivity. And I can eat lunch at my desk and check emails and talk on the phone, and I can do many other things while I'm on conference calls or stuff. Marianne makes fun of me because I'll do lots of things even while brushing my teeth because I want to be efficient. I want to get more done. The microwave is never fast enough. People never get to the point quick enough. And now I realize psychologists have a name for this malady called hurry sickness. And you know who you are because you push the elevator button over and over and over. That's you. So to the hurry sick, 5 seconds can seem like forever. In London School business professor Richard Jolly, he said about 95% of the managers over the last 10 years that he's worked with in his MBA classes and his coaching practice suffer from this ailment. And he defines it like this: the constant need to do more faster, even when there's no objective reason to be in such a rush. Again, none of you, but your hypothetical friends that have hurry sickness. Jolly goes on to say that many executives see this as a badge of honor. He says, hurry sickness can also damage your career even before it wrecks your health, because being in an incessant hurry has a way of making people see the forest for the trees. They miss the forest for the trees. Isn't that what Satan wants us to do? Is miss the forest for the trees? I believe that Satan knows that he's lost our souls for eternity if we've accepted Christ into our hearts. So what he's going to do is keep us so busy that we are ineffective individually and others will not see who God is through us. And I don't know about you, that's a pretty good, darn good strategy because it's working brilliantly. The average worker checks emails 50 times a day and sends and receives over 80 text messages and visits over 40 websites. More video is uploaded to YouTube in 60 days than all 3 major TV networks created in the last 60 years. In the last 20 years, working time, the time you spend at work, has increased 15% and leisure time has decreased 33%, even with all our technology advancements. The average American, not you guys, the average American is exposed to 10 hours of media each day and watches an average of 34 hours of TV each week. Over 30% of us report being extremely stressed. There are 6,000 tweets every second. 100 million hours per day of videos streamed through Netflix. 40% of working people skip breakfast, 39% skip lunch, and of those who take lunch, 50% take it at 15 minutes or less. Think about what happens when we are sinfully busy. We're too tired to do anything else than what is absolutely necessary. We're impatient. We don't have time to think and reflect. We're too tired to eat right and exercise. We don't have time to truly listen to God and to others, time to be present. We don't have time to care for ourselves, much less others. We end up doing good enough work instead of excellent work. We don't sleep enough. We don't spend enough time with God, and we don't have time to be generous with others, spiritually, financially, emotionally, because we just don't have time. Satan's strategy is working. John Ortberg, in an article he wrote about hurry sickness, says this: as much as we complain about it, there's part of us which is drawn to a hurried life. It makes us feel important. It keeps the adrenaline pumping. It means I don't have to look too closely at my heart or my life. It keeps us from feeling our loneliness. As long as I have meetings to attend to and occasions to be a part of, I can demonstrate that I am an important person. He says, hurry is not just about a disordered schedule. Hurry is a disordered heart. This is not a time management issue. This is a heart issue. He goes on to say, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith, it is that we will become so distracted, so rushed, and so preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of our faith. Did you get that? I think that describes the church. We're not going to renounce our faith, but we're going to be so busy that we settle for a mediocre version of it. A few years ago, there was a conference on spiritual disciplines. 3 great theological minds, Eugene Peterson, who wrote the Message Paraphrase and a bunch of other books, Dallas Willard, and John Ortberg, who I just quoted. And they talked all day about spiritual disciplines to this big audience. And at the end, they had Q&A. And one guy, it was not me, but I could have asked this question. He said, this has been a really good day, but could you just boil it down to one sentence? Right, that's us. Right, that's all great. 8 hours are great. Could you just give me that little one step that I could, maybe tweet out and feel good about myself or whatever? And so they huddle on stage. These 3 great minds, they huddle, they step back, and they put their arms around each other, and they're talking back and forth, like whispering, for like 4 minutes. It seemed like an eternity. And finally, they come out, they break the huddle, and Dallas Willard comes up, and this is what he says: ruthlessly eradicate hurry from your lives. Of all the things great theologians could say about how you grow closer to God, that's what they said. And look at those words. Not, don't be busy. Ruthlessly eradicate hurry in your lives. Jesus was busy. but he was never hurried. He never went about the busyness of his ministry in a way that, one, severed the life-giving connection between him and his Father. And he never went about it where it interfered with his ability to love and give and be generous to others. And he was busy. I put his schedule up against any of our schedules, but he wasn't hurried. So how do we do it? Right? You're looking for the 5-step plan. How do we ruthlessly eradicate hurry in our lives, knowing it's keeping us from loving and caring for and being generous to others? If we know being generous helps our own well-being and it shows the world who God is, how do we combat this powerful force of busyness? First, determine what lies beneath your need for busyness. Socrates said, "A life unexamined is not worth living." Examine what is driving your need to be busy. And don't say, "Oh, Paul, I got a busy job and I got 4 kids." That's great. Go deeper. Don't get intellectually lazy on this question. Go deeper of why. Why do you have this need? Do you have this need to be busy? Is it driven by fear? Is it jealousy? Is it pride? Is it greed, boredom, or your desire to impress others with how busy you are? What are the emotions behind your decisions regarding how you spend your time? I work with successful executives from all over the world at the Halftime Institute, and I have found that many times their identity is tied to being busy. Are you staying busy because you're not clear on who you are in Christ? Is busyness your new drug of choice? To escape from sitting and being with yourself, or sitting in your pain or your unforgiveness or your grief. If I just stay busy, I don't have to deal with that. Determine what lies beneath your need for busyness. Number 2, expose busyness for what it is. It is Satan's number 1 strategy. I believe it with all my heart. Right now, this is his strategy. Don't be scared of it. Just be aware of it. If he can keep us too busy, we will never have the kind of joy, impact, and freedom that Scriptures promise. Never. And he knows that. In C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and many of you have read it, and if you hadn't, I'd encourage you to read it. It's this senior demon named Screwtape, and he's mentoring his nephew, Wormwood. And Wormwood is a younger, less experienced demon, and Wormwood has been assigned to the man. That's what they call it in the book. And his whole goal is to drive him to the father below, Satan, they call him the father below, and away from the enemy, which is God in this context. And so Screwtape writes 31 letters in this little book. And in one of the letters, this is what he writes to Wormwood as a strategy for the man that he is trying to take away from God. He said, "It does not matter how small the sins are, Wormwood, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light, capital L, and out into nothing. Murder is no better than a deck of cards if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell, the safest road to separation from God, is the gradual one, the gentle slope, the soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, and without signposts." Satan is using busyness to ruin us and show the world around us that God makes no difference. That's how he's using it. Number 3, find ways to slow down. Slowing down allows us to reset our priorities. It allows us to refresh and rejuvenate and replenish. It gives us a chance to step back and just think about things. When's the last time you thought about things? I mean, like really thought about your life and where you're going, and you weren't interrupted with all the noise around you. It allows us to see others, sometimes for the first time. Slowing down is critical to our spiritual growth, so we must find ways to do it. About 4 years ago, I was in this season of halftime, and halftime is, I think the secular word would call it the midlife crisis. I don't want to call it that. Remember, I'm a marketing guy. Halftime sounds much more exciting, where just like the football metaphor, you come into halftime, you look back at the first half, and you see how you played, you make adjustments so you can play the second half better. And that's where I was. I was at halftime. And so I was reflecting on all this stuff, and I was mad at God for various reasons. A lot of things were going on in my mind. And I was like, God, I am so busy. I know intuitively that I need to grow closer to you in this season of halftime, but I'm just busy. And he just, when God just slaps you over the head sometimes, it's just, this was one of those moments. And he said, Paul, you drive to work 2 hours a day, back and forth. It's 2 hours. You think you could give that time to me? 2 hours a day. But I was efficient. I did conference calls in the car. I listened to sports radio in the car because that's fulfilling. And it was never silent. Are you kidding me? It wasn't silent. And so I committed for 30 days to sit in silence in my commute on the way to work and on the way home. It was a little awkward at first. And then I just began to pray. And I began to vent. I began to yell at God sometimes. I began to just process. Every once in a while, I'd throw on some worship music. I just sat in it for 30 days. And two things happened. One was I extended it for another 60 days because it was phenomenal. But this is what I learned. I learned a lot during those quiet moments, but this is the theme of all of that. 90 days of 2 hours a day of commuting was this. When I get rid of the noise around me, God speaks. So you don't think Satan is just trying to make it as noisy as possible so that we don't have the capacity to hear God. Find ways to slow down. Number 4, get clear on your calling. Get clear on your calling. We all have a calling. It's not just Eric. We all have something that God has called us to do in this season of life. A good friend of mine, who was my coach at the Halftime Institute, Jeff Spatafora, he just wrote a book called The Joy Model. If you want to look at something about joy and doing and being and all that, buy The Joy Model. It's a great book. And in this book, he talks about busyness and margin. And this is what he says. He says, if you want capacity in your calendar, get conviction about your calling. If you want capacity in your calendar, get conviction on your calling. Okay, so this is how that works out practically, is my son one time said, he goes, man, Dad, I am so busy. I got classes, I got job, I got this. Then all of a sudden, he met a girl. He got conviction about this girl. And it's amazing how his calendar freed up to spend time with her. It's the same concept. Get conviction on your calling. What is God calling you to do? Galatians 6:4-5 in the Message, I think, says it so clearly. It says, make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you've been given, and then sink yourself into it. So if you make a careful exploration of who you are, what your strengths are, what your gifts are, what your passions are, your successes, your failures, your experience, your background, your education, you make a careful exploration of who you are, coupled with God, what do you want me to do? And then you put time and energy into it, you're going to be really good at it. And Paul knows that because what does he say next? Don't be impressed with yourself. Because if you know who you are and how God's wired you and what he's called you to do and sink yourself into it, you're going to be really good at that. So don't be impressed with yourself because God's the one that's doing it. And don't compare yourself to others because that's another huge trick of the enemy. Well, I'm not as good as them, or this isn't going right, or whatever. Don't compare yourself to others. Each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your life. Get clear on your calling. And finally, and most importantly, abide in him. Jesus is the only thing that can pull us away from this force of busyness. John 15 says, abide in me, and I will abide in you, and then you will bear fruit. The command there is not to bear fruit. The command is what? Abide. But what's going to happen when you abide? You're going to naturally bear fruit. That's a great paradox. You're going to naturally bear fruit. When you spend time with him, it's going to overflow out of your heart, and you're going to have the fruits of the Spirit are going to come out of you naturally. Abide in him. Matthew 11:28-30 says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me. Work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Randy Alcorn says, generosity is a joyful surrender to a greater person and a greater agenda. It embodies one of the values you have here at Lake Arlington, sacrifice. God gave all generously and graciously so that what? We give all to him. Generosity is a vivid reminder that our life is about God and not us. And as we realize this and we begin living this truth in God's clever way, we take care of our own well-being and we show others who God is. Let's pray. Father, I am so glad that you are God and we are not. Remind us of that today, that we are not you. Remind us of who we are in you. And Father, for this busyness, this strategy of the enemy that is so pervasive, I pray, Father, that we can address it in our lives, that we can address it knowing it's going to enhance our well-being of who we are, but then also that it will show people in a lost and dying and horribly complex and confusing world that there is hope, and they can see it in us, that this can be something that the world sees and says, I don't know about those Christians, but they don't seem as busy. They seem joyful. Help us not be indifferent to what this could look like in our own lives. Father, thank you again for who you are. We give all this to you in Jesus' name. Amen.